The Wild West Saloon wasn't a place of swagger and heroes. It was a disease factory built from scrap wood, sawdust, and lies. In the heart of Dodge City, the stench was so thick it could choke a man, while cholera claimed more lives than bullets. Filth, Rotgut whiskey laced with poison, and sudden violence ruled these grimy dens, far from the stories Hollywood tells. So how did survival inside these dens of filth, firewater, and fistfights truly work? In mining camps and cattle towns across the frontier, the first sign of a new settlement was often a ramshackle saloon. Most were thrown together from whatever was at hand, planks pried from shipping crates, driftwood, even old canvas tents stretched across rough frames. In places like Deadwood and Tombstone, a building's face might rise 2 stories above the street, flat and imposing. But step behind that false front, and the illusion vanished. The main room was a cramped rectangle, barely wide enough for a crooked bar, a few battered tables, and a scattering of stools. The air inside was thick with a mix of smells: stench of stale beer, spilled whiskey, sweat, tobacco, and the ever-present tang of manure drifting in from the street. Sawdust, swept into thick layers across the floor, soaked up liquor, spit, and mud from boots, but it rarely stayed dry or clean. Every step sent up a musty cloud, and the grit clung to boots and trousers alike. Light came from smoky kerosene lamps hung on the walls or set on the bar, their flames flickering through glass chimneys streaked with soot. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the air shimmered with haze, making it hard to tell where the smoke from cigars ended and the fumes from the lamps began. Batwing doors swung open and shut, meant less for show than for ventilation. They did little to keep out dust or stench. In winter, a wood stove might add another layer of smoke, mixing with the rest. For the men who crowded inside, these spaces offered shelter from the wind and cold, but little comfort. The walls sweated with moisture, the floors grew slick, and the noise of boots, voices, and hacking coughs filled the gloom. This was the real saloon, not a stage for legends, but a battered, reeking box where survival began with just making it through the door. Water was precious and hard-won on the frontier. For most families, a bath meant hauling buckets from a distant well or creek, then heating the water over a fire. The ritual played out the same way in cabins from Kansas to Montana. Father bathed first, followed by mother, then the children in order of age. By the time the youngest climbed in, the water was cloudy with grit and sweat. Weekly bathing was the best most could hope for. In between, dirt and lice built up in hair, under collars, and in every crevice of clothing. Saloon hygiene fared no better. There were no sewers, and waste from outhouses or chamber pots often seeped into the street, only to be tracked back indoors. Lice and roaches thrived in the warmth and darkness beneath the bar and in the seams of wooden walls. Flies swarmed, spilled beer and tobacco spit on the sawdust floor. Shared drinking cups sat on the counter, rinsed only when the barkeep remembered, and always in the same murky basin. Disease flourished in these conditions. In 1878, Dodge City's Board of Health counted 23 deaths from cholera in a single outbreak, traced to a pair of saloons using communal glasses and water barrels tainted by runoff. Tuberculosis spread in the thick, smoky air, passed from cough to cough. Smallpox, too, found easy prey in crowded, unwashed rooms. Coroner records from Deadwood and mining camps show that these invisible killers claimed far more lives than bullets ever did. For many, the greatest risk in a saloon was not a gunfight. It was what you could not see in the glass or on the air. Rotgut was the common currency behind every bar. True whiskey, aged, imported, and safe, was almost unheard of in frontier towns. Instead, saloon keepers relied on a lethal mix: raw grain alcohol straight from eastern distilleries, cut with burnt sugar for color and chewing tobacco for bite. Some batches went further. Turpentine, creosote, and even sulfuric acid found their way into barrels, all to stretch supply and boost profits. Merchants wrote home about joy juice and coffin varnish they sold by the gallon, sometimes bragging that no one could tell the difference until the morning after. Sudden deaths were swift and brutal. In 1867, Virginia City was rocked by a string of sudden deaths after a shipment of whiskey left more than 20 men writhing in agony. A coroner's inquest found the barrels laced with industrial solvents, relabeled and sold as the real thing. Survivors described blindness, convulsions, and days of fever. This was not a rare event. Across the West, saloon patrons learned to sniff their glass, eye the barkeep, and sometimes spit out the first swallow. Trust was scarce, and suspicion ran high. The next drink could be their last. Barroom chaos in the movies rarely matches what actually happened behind saloon doors. Court records from Tombstone, Dodge City, and Deadwood show that violence was usually quick and personal. An argument over cards, a grudge from earlier in the week, or a drunken insult that turned ugly. Most confrontations involved just 2 or 3 men. The rest scattered for cover or pressed to the walls, hoping to avoid the fallout. Chairs didn't fly, bottles rarely crashed, and when guns did come out, the outcome was almost always deadly and swift, not drawn out for dramatic effect. Towns grew tired of bloodshed. In April 1881, Tombstone passed Ordinance No. 9, making it illegal to carry a pistol, rifle, or even a large knife inside city limits without a written permit. Signs at the edge of town warned newcomers to check their weapons with the sheriff or at the livery. Bartenders and bouncers enforced the rule, collecting revolvers at the door and returning them when men left. This push for order meant most disputes ended with fists or harsh words, not gunfire. Even so, coroner files from the era record that when bullets were drawn, it was almost always fatal. No second takes, no slow motion duels, just a brief eruption and its aftermath. The real risk in a saloon wasn't a wild melee, but a single, sudden act of violence that could end a life before anyone had time to react. Gambling tables stood at the heart of every saloon, drawing miners, cowboys, and drifters with the promise of easy riches. Faro, poker, and 3-card Monte were the games of choice, their rules scrawled on chalkboards or barked out by the dealer. For newcomers, the action seemed honest enough. Cards shuffled, bets placed, silver dollars stacked high. But the real game played out in the shadows. Marked cards, gaffed faro boxes, and loaded dice tilted the odds. Dealers slid cards from the bottom of the deck, while Confederates crowded the table, distracting the unwary. Gambling manuals circulated warnings, but few heeded them in the heat of play. Disputes over cheating erupted often. In 1885, a Leadville saloon saw a card game spiral into chaos when a miner accused the house of fixing the deck. Fists flew, chairs toppled, and the fight spilled into the street before officers hauled the men to court. The courtroom itself became an extension of the saloon, shouts, threats, and a judge forced to clear the benches. Figures like Canada Bill Jones became legends, celebrated for their cunning with marked cards and cold decks. In the West, money laid on the table was more than a wager. It was a spark ready to ignite the next round of trouble. Women who worked in saloons rarely fit the roles that Hollywood imagines. Most were hired as entertainers, singing, playing piano, or coaxing lonely men to buy another round. Their pay depended not just on performance, but on how much alcohol they could move. For some, like Lotta Crabtree, the job meant much more than survival. Crabtree, known as the Golden Girl of the West, signed contracts that tied her earnings to drink sales and ticket receipts. By her 20s, she had earned enough to buy property in San Francisco and invest in bonds, a rare feat for any woman of the era, let alone one with roots in saloon stages. But the saloon door was a barrier as much as a gateway. Respectable women, wives, teachers, churchgoers, were not allowed inside except as performers or for urgent business. The rules were unwritten but understood. In towns like Cheyenne in 1884, black cowboys and Chinese immigrants found themselves turned away, sometimes by city ordinance, more often by custom. Nat Love, a renowned black cowboy, wrote of being denied entry to Cheyenne's main saloons, forced instead to drink in segregated halls. Notices posted by city councils and bar owners spelled out who belonged and who did not. Even among white men, etiquette was strict. Never ask about a man's past, never refuse a drink offered, and never question why someone kept to himself. The saloon was the center of frontier life, but only for those allowed to cross its threshold. The Wild West Saloon's legacy is not just myth, it is a warning. Today, unregulated spaces and exclusionary codes still shape who belongs and who profits. As new frontiers emerge, the struggle between survival, exploitation, and belonging remains. History's filth may fade, but its lessons outlast every false front.